gosh, it's so great to be here today. Oh my gosh, all of you guys are just like radiating from Max and Tanya. That was like the best thing for me to follow. So thank you to them. And thank you to Jeannie for bringing us all together because this is really special. So I'm excited to be talking to all of you today. As Tiffany just shared, I'm going to be talking with you about sourcing, which if any of you know anything about our brand or follow me on social media, then you know that there isn't really anything that I'm more passionate about than sourcing. There's nothing that I love to talk about more, that I love to think about more. It's just truly my favorite thing, and I believe that it's the foundation of our brand for sure. And we're going to be examining sourcing through the lens of sustainability, the lens of efficacy, and the lens of heart. But I'd like to start out by just sharing with you my journey and how I got into sourcing to begin with, kind of that turning point in my life when I saw it as something really important. I first kind of started thinking about sourcing when I was a sommelier. I was a sommelier before I became an herbalist, and I was actually a sommelier right here in Sausalito at Cavallo Point. And for any of you who don't know, a sommelier just means that basically a wine expert. So when I was a somm, I got to go to wineries all the time, which really means that I got to go to vineyards all the time, which really means that I got to go to farms all the time. So I got to see firsthand just how important farming is for the end ingredient. I got to meet a lot of winemakers who were so incredibly passionate and so in tune with their grapes on such a deep level. Like they were out there every day testing sugar levels and looking at the tannins and wondering which day they were going to harvest. And it was just really interesting to me because I grew up in the Midwest, and farming in the Midwest is really just a lot of cornfields that are farmed with combines, you know, so you don't really see farmers just out there walking around. So it just kind of gave me another perspective about what farming is. It also introduced me to biodynamic farming for the first time, which I'm really passionate about as well and find really fascinating. A very specific instance kind of triggered it for me. I was visiting Literai Vineyards, which is still one of my favorite wineries to this day. It's a biodynamic winery up in Sebastopol. And the winemaker also owns the land and cares for the grapes. So he kind of does all of it. So he's very passionate about what he does. And he was giving us a tour. And the grapes were dormant at this time, and in between the rows of grapes there was calendula flowers and red clovers growing. And at the time I was already studying herbal medicine. I forgot to mention that. While I was a sommelier, I was studying herbal medicine during the day. And so there were these beautiful wildflowers growing in between the rows of grapes. And of course, my first thought was very selfish. Like my first thought was, who are you growing these for? Like thinking that I wanted them, you know? And he said, oh, no. We just grow them for the land. So that moment shifted something in me because I saw that he was doing something just for his land. And in biodynamics, that's very, very common, but I had never heard of that before. So for me, that was just really a shifting moment. He also did a lot of other things like water conservation and all different kinds of things for his land, but that was kind of the moment for me. Another great thing that happened to me while I was a somm is I got to work with a really wonderful farm-to-table chef, Joseph Humphrey. And that really changed the way that I eat forever. Because for Chef Joe, he was really passionate about sharing the story of these ingredients and where these ingredients came from. So, for example, when I would sit down to eat a meal from Chef Joe, it wasn't really just eating. Like I knew that my greens were wild harvested in the Cascade Mountains. And I knew that my cheese was made by a California cheesemaker, but she studied in France, and that style was so important to her. And I knew that my grits were actually hand harvested, hand washed, and hand stone ground. And when I would eat that meal, it made me curious about where these ingredients came from. It made me grateful. It made me humble for all the work that had gone into just one meal. It made me conscious and mindful about what I was eating, appreciative. It just really, truly changed the way that I eat forever. And at that time, I was still studying herbal medicine, and I knew that I was going to be creating a skincare line. I already had the love of spas, and and estheticians and their work, and I wanted to create a line that was right for them. And at that time, I put it together that it had to be sourced that way. It had to be sourced with that level of attention, because I didn't really see people in spas turning bottles over and getting curious about where those came from. I didn't see that being highlighted or being a discussion. So I knew that then that it was my job to make it a discussion. So that's kind of my journey, and that's how I got here. And so I'm just going to share with you a little bit about a little peek as to kind of what sourcing looks like for me. So we're first going to look at it through the lens of sustainability. And yes, I have a prop, and I do not have jokes, and I do not have meditation, but this is what we have. So sustainability, the most obvious way for me to source more sustainably is to make sure that our ingredients are organic. For me, that's like a no-brainer. We will not make exceptions for absolutely any reason. And there are environmentalists out there that will truly make a very strong case for if everyone farmed organically, we could reverse global warming. So it's something that I feel as a green beauty brand owner, as a manufacturer, I feel that I have a very strong responsibility to make sure that we're sourcing organically. And the great thing is that it's really not that hard anymore. It's not that hard for me as a brand owner. And it's also something that is so easy for you to do as a consumer, as an esthetician, as a spa owner. It's something that's the easiest way for you to also contribute and make a difference is just make sure that that's what you're supporting. Yeah. I used to kind of hear that it was really challenging to source organic ingredients. And I also used to hear that it was more expensive. And it definitely is slightly more expensive, so I can definitely hear that. But I would say that it's definitely not that hard anymore. They are readily available, and they are out there, so I'm so grateful for that. The other point is wild crafting and wild harvesting. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that term. That essentially just means that those ingredients have been harvested out in the wild. And we actually don't rely on ingredients that are wild crafted and wild harvested. Now, this definitely isn't a negative term for across the board, but I find it really risky because when I studied herbal medicine, they literally don't let you leave like the first day without drilling it into you. Don't harm the life of the plant and don't harm the environment. Like they won't let you leave the first day without kind of drilling that into you. And with wild crafting and wild harvesting, there's a lot of risks that plants can be wild harvested or wild crafted to the point of endangerment. And this truly happens all the time. There's a great website out there called the United Plant Savers. And so if that's something that interests you, I definitely recommend you checking it out. It kind of keeps you up to date on what plants are going endangered and so that you can keep an eye on it. But basically, I just think that in general, it's better to source from farms that are cultivating organically because they're giving back and they're not just taking. And like I said, it's not that it's all bad, but it's very risky, especially when you think of ingredients like essential oils or carrier oils, because the masses of land that's needed to produce those things is so great that those are things that tend to raise kind of red flags for me. I would say there's a few like Palo Santo and frankincense that come to mind that are typically, I would say, like safer, like that's not going to raise a red flag for me on a label, but oftentimes any other ingredient would. So just something else to ask about as a consumer if that's something that interests you. There's definitely lots of little things too. I say little, they're obviously big things, but I'm not going to go deep into each of them. We can talk to our farms if they have solar power, if they have wind power, what they're doing for water preservation. Are they biodynamic as well as organic? So there's lots of different ways that we can approach that sustainability angle. Definitely organic isn't always for us, but it's always great if they can do some of these other things as well. And then this is the one that I feel is probably the closest to my own heart and something that I'm really, really passionate about. It's creating sources where there are not already sources. So considering the distance traveled for the source. And this is something that I don't feel is really talked about very much because green beauty, everybody kind of wants to think it's green, it's good for the environment, you know? But I would say probably over 90% of the ingredients that are in the cosmetic beauty industry today are going to be sourced from India, are going to be sourced from Egypt, are going to be sourced from China. So they're going to be coming all around the globe to wherever that manufacturing location is, and then all the way around the globe to you. So I feel that it's my personal responsibility to create some noise about this and do anything that I can about this. And like I said, create sources where there are not sources. So what that means for me as a brand is reaching out to a farm that might grow kale and saying, hey, you grow kale, that's great. Do you think you could maybe also grow some calendula flowers for us? Can we talk about what that looks like? Can we talk about how you would need to harvest them for effective plant medicine? Can we talk about how you would dry them? So it really means like putting yourself out there and asking someone to do something that they've never done before and trying to make it worth it for them. So that's something that really means a lot to me, and I think especially just because as the natural beauty industry grows so rapidly that sources and ingredients are not in infinite supply. So I just think that as brand owners and as manufacturers, it's our responsibility to continue to support farmers as much as we can. So that's my sustainability lens. So the next lens here is the lens of efficacy. And this lens really just basically falls all on the phytochemical profile of the plant. So it really comes down to it being that simple. Like all of the studies that you have for any kind of plant medicine, any results that you have to rely on for plant medicine always falls back on a strong phytochemical profile of the plant. So if that isn't present, then you're just not going to see results. So that's obviously why that's so important as well when you're sourcing for skincare that you want to really work. And a few ways that we consider that is we consider that in the pre-harvest phase. So we might be talking to farmers about whether something is wet farmed or dry farmed. We might be examining climate change and if they went through anything crazy that year. We might be talking about soil health. Even something like that would make a difference. Time of harvest is incredibly important, whether that be time of year that it's harvested or time of day that it's harvested. Hand harvested is also incredibly important and not something that you would probably think too much about. But for our plants, like especially if you're thinking about little calendula flowers, you know, they don't all bloom at the same time. So if you think about your plants that you have at home, they're not all blooming at the same time. So you just want to make sure that, you know, you're always harvesting the plant right at the right moment, which requires hand harvesting and it requires a lot of time and dedication. Post-harvest is also important for the phytochemical profile of the plant, how it's processed. Is it refined? Is it refined either physically or chemically? Both of those things are going to have a strong effect on the phytochemical profile. How is it stored? Is it stored in plastic? Is it stored in glass? Is it exposed to UV light? Any of those things are going to be have a strong effect on the phytochemical profile. There's definitely testing that you can do at the end of the day to make sure that your profile is really strong. And those would be like GSMS tests. I'm sure you guys hear about that for essential oils. Peroxide value tests, which actually test if your oil is starting to go rancid. There's all kinds of tests like that. So those are all really important. Yeah, so I think I definitely love relying on that testing, but I also really love relying on my senses, especially from coming from that sommelier background. I'm lucky to have really strong senses. So that would be just like smell, touch, taste, and appearance of an ingredient. And I tend to rely on those, honestly, quite more than I do trust the tests because the tests are adulterated and just duplicated all the time from year to year. So I can't tell you how many times that, you know, I haven't been able to rely on that test, but I've been able to rely on my own senses. So that's been really important. Yeah. So again, all of that just helps to determine the phytochemical profile, which really plays a large part in efficacy. All right, so this is my favorite. This is going to be my favorite lens to talk about because the other two are honestly not that interesting unless you're really, really into the planet or you're really, really into efficacy. But this one's my favorite. It's the easiest to talk about too. So this is sourcing through the lens of your heart, you know. And I'd like to first kind of touch on two really quick things so that kind of live in the back of my brain all the time when I'm sourcing and creating products. One is the studies of Dr. Emoto. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. I'm sure many of you are. But Dr. Emoto is actually a Japanese researcher who studied and proved that our consciousness and our intentions have either can have a positive or a negative effect on the molecular structure of water. So I really loved that. I learned that when I was 19, so it's been with me and lived with me here in my brain for a really long time. And it's really cool to think about when you think about how plants are mostly water and we're mostly water. So our intentions and our consciousness are just so incredibly important. I also love thinking about quantum physics. And trust me, I'm not going to go too far down this road. But quantum physics tells us that we're 99% space and energy. And I also find that really fascinating. It just goes to tell us how important that energy is that's put into the plant and put into the products. I definitely associate all of those things back to our farmers. Our farmers have a deep love for their land and a deep relationship with their land. And I want that to come through in our products for you. So that's this really beautiful energy that they give to their plants and to their land, which is basically like one of their family for almost all of our farmers. I think they consider their land one of the family. So I want you to feel that. And I also think about intention and how important that is in that process. So, for example, in January is when we start meeting with our farmers and talking with our farmers. And that often means that we walk the land together, that we talk about what challenges might come up for the year, what we're going to be growing and facing the year ahead. And when we do that, we think about you. And that space is held for you. And before the calendula seeds are even in the ground, we know that they're going to be medicine for you. And I think that there's a huge power in that, because there's obviously a consciousness that these plants have, and they're able to take on that intention. And I just think that's really beautiful and powerful. So now, kind of full circle, when I wash my face in the evening or do a beauty ritual, and I turn that bottle over and I see 24 ingredients, I now can get curious about where these ingredients came from. And I can be humbled and grateful and sink into my body that they traveled so far and there was so much work that went into getting them there. It makes me more conscious and more mindful. I just consider and honor their journey, and I think about how they're here to support me. They're here to support my skin health, and that just makes the medicine that much stronger, and it makes the whole experience that much more powerful. So I'm really grateful that now this whole thing has come kind of full circle for me, and I can think back to that dining experience that I had as a sommelier that changed the way that I eat. And I can now say that that's the way that I experience beauty rituals. I think about these ingredients and where they come from and the beautiful, beautiful people that grew them and the great intentions that are behind that. And that, to me, is really what slow beauty is. I know that for a long time, people have associated me with slow beauty. But for me, that's why, because I really do see these ingredients through from seed to bottle. Another really popular phrase that we see a lot. But when you actually live it, it's definitely something different and something really special. So that's what slow beauty is to me, is kind of that whole full circle journey of the plant and getting to you. And that's it.